and I will share my screen. So again, it's 50 questions. You'll have 75 minutes to complete your exam. There will be math. Just can you see the PowerPoint, Sarah?
Yes, I could see it.
All right, perfect. All right, so we talked about ethics, right? Ethics is the system of standards or moral principles that direct actions as being right or wrong, right? It's concerned with the ways people, either individually or as a group, decide the following, like what actions are right or wrong, if one has the right to do something, if one has the duty to do something, if one ought to do something. Um, and we talked about professional versus or personal versus professional ethics, right? We talked about how, we know that our personal ethics, oh my gosh, sorry, provide our guidelines for, how we live our lives. And we get to choose what our personal code of ethics is. But there may be times in our nursing careers or experience that our personal code of ethics will conflict with the law, which is our State Nurse Practice Act. And we've talked about a couple of different examples of how that could occur, within our, oh my God, within our time. All right, we got another one coming in. Um, which brought us to our ethical responsibilities, right? And so we talked about client advocacy. Client advocacy is making sure that, basically that our patients or our clients have everything, all the information that they need in order to make those, informed decisions. We know that knowledge is power, right? And that's probably one of the biggest things that we can give our patients is information, so that they can make that, decision regarding their care. Um, having every information, it's all the information. It's also making sure that we respect their decisions when they do make a decisions or when they do make a decision, sorry, right? So kind of respecting that. Talked about accountability. Um, you're responsible for your nursing actions, what you do. You are responsible for, everything that you do as far as your practice and how that is going to affect your patient care. Colleague reporting, we talked about colleague reporting. Um, if if there's you have a fellow coworker who is coming to work intoxicated, or even, not taking care of their patients. Um, I'm trying to think of what else. Diverting medications for personal use or not giving them to the clients. That is our ethical responsibility is to report those coworkers. You'll follow your procedures, but generally speaking, you are going to report that at least to your supervisor, because that is a huge safety concern when it comes to our clients. We don't want to put our clients in any kind of danger. So making sure that we do that. And then the system-based issues. So identifying systems-based issues, right? If there's a new procedure that's implemented and you have not been properly educated or trained on it, same thing with like new equipment. If you've not been trained on how to use new equipment, then obviously we don't want to use new equipment if we've not been trained on how to use it. So, letting administration know so that that can be, that proper training can be made. The principles of ethics. Um, we have your non-maleficence, which is do no harm, your beneficence, which means to do good. Autonomy is the freedom to choose. It also includes your patient privacy. Fidelity means to be true. That includes HIPAA. And then justice is fair to all, right? So non-maleficence, again, do no harm. It's things like making sure that you're following the rights of medication administration, using your SBAR for communication. It's also the things like making sure that the bed is in the lowest position, their call bell is within reach, um, that they're safe before you leave the room. It's also non-maleficence is then also caring for patients that may conflict with your own ethical values or ethical principles. Um, your beneficence, right, is to do good. And so this is the basis of trust in nursing. It also involves preventing harm and removing harm. And so making sure that, before you leave work, that you're turning over, you're giving the SBAR report, so that they can continue care. If you get the wrong medication, it's making sure that we report it as soon as we recognize it. So basically, it's placing the good of the client before our own needs. Autonomy is the freedom to choose. Again, this also includes um, their privacy. So it's, thinking through all of the facts, deciding on the basis of an independent thinking process. It's acting based on a personal device. It's undertaking a decision voluntarily, without pressure, whether it's direct or subtle from anyone else, right? So again, it's giving them all the information that they need in order to make that informed decision about the care that they do want, or even the care that they don't want, right? So um, it's not just about, we want them to do this procedure, right? They need to have all the information to make that decision. Privacy, we know, is both a ethical as well as a legal issue. Autonomy does include the client's right to privacy. Um, so we do have to respect that as well. Um, Culture or religion may be contrary to accepted medical ethics as well, right? So this is like, um, you're a Jehovah Witness that doesn't want to accept a blood transfusion, right? It could be that, they're diagnosed with, an advanced stage cancer and they don't want to have treatment. That could all fall under. And then fidelity means to be true. And this is acting in the client's best interest when they don't have the ability to make choices for themselves. This also includes HIPAA, right? So we don't talk about our clients in the hallway, in the elevator, in the cafeteria where others can hear us. This is also if you hear other nurses, other, UAPs, anybody that is talking bad about a client, right, that we stop that, that we, explain that, we don't talk bad about our clients. Um, then we have, and this is just more on autonomy, like I said, thinking through all the facts, deciding on the basis of an independent thinking process, acting based on a personal decision, undertaking that decision voluntarily. We also talked about beneficent paternalism. Beneficent paternalism generally is a disrespectful attitude toward the client and what the client has to contribute to their personal care. It's an I know what's best for you attitude, right? So they make a decision, you're like, no, I'm just kidding, no. It's but it's something that we generally don't use in healthcare. The one time or one, specific time that beneficent paternalism can be used is in extreme circumstances, and it's most often a medical decision. So, example, the healthcare provider can go to the court to be allowed to do a potentially life-saving procedure when parents have decided that parents have refused to sign an authorized treatment for the client. So, like, I'll use um, the Jehovah Witnesses again. So let's say you have a Jehovah Witness child who needs a life-saving blood transfusion. Then the provider or the facility can go to the court and get permission to actually do that blood transfusion. Okay, so that would be an example of when we would use beneficent paternalism. Again, generally speaking, we don't do this. Um, we talk about the legal aspects of healthcare, the state statutes that apply to LPNs or licensed persons in situations, and client care that could result in legal action, right? So knowing where to find the information that you need. Um, your organization's rules and regulations, and you should always have access to those through your organization. The obligations under the law, your professional groups like your NAPNES or what is it, the NALPN or something. I can't remember the acronym for it, but there's different organizations that you can look at um, and your state Nurse Practice Act. And so remember that knowledge of your state Nurse Practice Act is absolutely necessary. It can protect you, right, against acts and decisions that could involve you in lawsuits. So not knowing your Nurse Practice Act or ignorance of your Nurse Practice Act is never going to be a good defense. So you absolutely need to look at that. Um, your Nurse Practice Act will define the minimal competencies that are required for you to practice safely in your state. So again, it's really important to know your scope of practice. So contents of the Nurse Practice Act. So it will include the general provisions, like it'll outline the um, function of the State Board of Nursing, the general procedures, the licensure process, what elements would define unprofessional conduct, information related to reasons why someone would have a suspended or a revoked license. It also outlines the impaired professional program. Um, it'll list the general functions of the licensed nurse, whether it's LPN, LVN, or RN. The definition of nursing, there's specific definitions for practical nursing as practical nurses as well as registered nurses. It also outlines the standards of nursing conduct, the organization, approval, and administration of nursing programs, as well as continuing education, which brings us to the State Board of Nursing. So some of that again, that Nurse Practice Act is going to outline the Board of Nursing functions as well. So the common functions, licensing and certifying. Again, certifications though may come from another association like it's NFLPN, sorry, your NAPNES, and there's others out there as well. It sets the fees, right? How much does it cost for your initial license? How much does it cost for your renewal of licensure? It establishes the standards for educational programs. It also approves the schools of nursing, determines the duration and renewal of license, right? So is it every 1 year, every 2 years? Remember too that your boards may require continuing education credits for renewal of your license. So always make sure to check that, make sure you're getting your CEs. It maintains inactive status lists. It'll also carry out the disciplinary action for violators. develops then programs for the impaired nurses, also for suspending and revoking license. So things that can result in disciplinary action, fraud, deceit, criminal activity, negligence, any violation of your Nurse Practice Act, discipline by another jurisdiction. So, if you committed a felony, um, that can be reported to the Board of Nursing, incompetence, unethical conduct, and of course, drug and alcohol abuse. So let's say something happens, um, and we look at the disciplinary steps for the Board of Nursing. So somebody, files a complaint and sends it to the state board, then the board is going to evaluate, is the nurse's behavior unsafe, incompetent, or unethical? Is alcohol, medications, or chemicals affecting the nurse's physical or mental condition? And is it a violation of the, Nurse Practice Act or another law? And then they'll review the complaint. So they'll verify if and in which state the nurse is licensed. They'll verify whether the act is regulated by the Nurse Practice Act. Um, and then they'll look and see if there was a positive background check. And then they'll do their investigation. So they'll gather evidence, they'll do interviews, and then the board proceedings. This is where the nurse will have the opportunity to respond to any allegations against their license. And so this could be a variety. It could be a settlement conference. It could be a formal administrative hearing, or it could be alternative to discipline programs. So maybe they need to be part of that impaired nurse program, right? So the substance abuse monitoring programs, there's a variety of those different things out there. Then they'll have the board action. There's different things that can happen. There could be emergency action, which is an immediate suspension to protect the public complaint, pending a complete investigation. Could just do disciplinary action, which could be a variety of things, a fine, it could be a public reprimand, it could limit your practice, suspend your license, revoke your license, provide, provisions for remediation, education, or monitoring. Um, and then the last part is your reporting and enforcement. So we have NERSIS, which is a national database for verifying licenses, discipline and action privileges for nurses. So if anybody has anything that is on their license, it is reported to NERSIS. And so people can look, or usually employers, but others can look in that national database to see if there's any action that has been taken against a nurse's license. There's also the National Provider Database. And so federal law does require that adverse actions taken against a healthcare professional's license also be reported to that National Provider Database. So nurses verification. So again, if you go to nurses, it will list your name, it will list the license number as well as your expiration date and any disciplinary action that is, taken against your nursing license. So license number, expiration date, disciplinary actions. We look at legal liability. So criminal versus civil action. All right. So criminal action involves people and society as a whole. So government against, government versus the individual. It is the criminal action is like your felony or your misdemeanor. A misdemeanor is the least serious charge. It can result in a fine or prison sentence, usually less than a year. Um, and then, so could, and then your felony, sorry, is a more serious event, or offense. It usually has a penalty that ranges from more than 1 year in prison to, right, death. And so homicide, larceny, embezzlement, would be some examples. Your civil, this is a civil action protects individual rights. So this is individual versus individual. And so, it could be an infringement on their individual rights. Usually results in monetary compensation, right? So there is some sort of um, that is, that's basically, what it's what's the word I'm looking for? The reward usually is some sort of a monetary compensation. And this will include your intentional torts and your intentional and unintentional torts. So an intentional tort is intended to cause harm to the client. So a threat or actual physical harm to the client, whereas unintentional, they didn't mean to harm the client. All right. So this could be, you didn't follow your rights of medication administration. You gave the medication or gave the client a wrong medication, which caused injury. Liability. And so liability is being responsible for something. So liability in nursing is associated with civil law, right? It includes your contracts, your negligence, as well as your intentional and unintentional torts. Um, Negligence, something that we don't ever want to be part of. But negligence is the failure to use such care as a reasonably prudent and careful person would use under similar circumstances. So the most common type of negligence in practical nursing relates to action or lack of action, not what was intended to do. All right, so either an act of commission or a lack of omission. Um, so, you forgot to do something or you, I'm trying to think of another one. Um, we'll get to it. So four elements that are needed to prove, oops, sorry. Oh yeah, this is where I'm going to go. So four elements that are needed to prove negligence. We have duty. Duty is refers to the nurse's responsibility to provide care in an acceptable way. Okay, so as a nurse, you'll have the duty based on your education as well as the policy and standards of where you are working. Breach of duty means that you didn't adhere to the nursing standard of care. And this is where, what was expected of the nurse was not done, which is an act of omission, or was not done correctly, which is an act of commission. Okay. And so a expert nurse witness is going to establish that, that standard of care. So for example, let's say, trying to think, an act of omission. Let's say you failed to turn and reposition your client every 2 hours and they developed a pressure area. Or an act of commission, you did not do something correctly. So maybe you gave the wrong medication. Damages mean that the client must be able to show the nurse's negligent act injured him or her in some way. Okay, so that not turning them and repositioning them every 2 hours, they developed that pressure area, right? So they have to be able to show that your negligent act injured them in some way. Proximate cause means that there's a reasonable cause and effect relationship between either the act of omission or the act of commission of the nursing act, and there was harm to the client. So did their a negligent act cause the injury? The difference between assault and battery. So battery is actually to cause physical harm. So battery beat. I don't know. That's how I remember it. So because I always used to get these confused myself. So battery is actually physically touching and harming someone. Assault is a threat. right? So threatening, I'm gonna put you in restraints. I'm going to beat you up. I'm going to hurt you, whatever that is. So assault is the threat, battery is the actual harm caused. Chemical versus physical restraints. Chemical restraints are medications. So, giving them a medication so that they'll, go to sleep and not bother you. Whereas your physical restraints would be like your wrist restraints, your vest restraints, you know, restrain, some sort of restraint so that they can't physically move. Libel and slander. Um, libel is, or I'm sorry, yeah, libel is written, slander is spoken. So S for S. So defamation, damage to character can be through either spoken or written. So slander again is spoken, libel is written. So examples of libel would be sending an email to the editor of a newspaper, posting on social media, false accusations on performance evaluation. So again, it's defamation of character. Slander is spoken, libel is written. So client, believes that um, something has occurred that, has violated their legal rights. So, first thing they're going to do is the client is going to go and seek the advice of an attorney. Okay. So, the attorney, once once the client goes to the attorney, before anything else happens, okay, before it goes anywhere else, the attorney is going to have a nurse expert review the client's chart to see whether the nurse has violated the nursing standard of care. All right. And then once that is established, so if it is determined that a standard of care has been violated, then the lawsuit is filed. If there is not a standard of care that has been violated, then it's not going to go anywhere. So again, they go get an attorney. The attorney is going to have a nurse expert review the chart. And then if there is a standard of care violation, then the client or the plaintiff is going to file a complaint that documents the grievance. And then that is then served to the defendant, which would be the nurse. And then the defendant responds in writing. And then we have the discovery trial or discovery period, and this is the pre-trial activity. So they'll get statements from the nurse, the witnesses, the nurse expert, the client, as well as other caregivers. They'll also look at the policy and procedures of the healthcare facilities. And then during the trial, right, the information is presented to the judge or the jury, and then a verdict is reached. And the client has the burden of proof. Okay. So the client has to prove, right, that what that nurse's action or inaction, was actually caused the harm. The award in malpractice is to, make the person whole, right? Which is generally going to be a monetary settlement. Um, and then there is always the chance for an appeal, which is a request for another trial. If either the plaintiff or the defendant doesn't, like what the verdict was, right? They have the ability to appeal. Patient care partnerships. The American Hospital Association developed the Patient's Bill of Rights, which was revised and renamed the Patient Care Partnership, Understanding Expectations, Rights, and Responsibilities. This is an ethical, rather than a legal document for hospitals recommending ways to guarantee client rights. It encourages the client to be a participant in their plan of care through collaboration with their healthcare providers, right? So, go into the hospital or even any kind of healthcare setting, generally they have like some big poster or something that outlines, right, what the patient bill of rights is. So some of the, expectations, right, are high quality care, clean, safe environment, being involved in their care, protecting their privacy, help when they're leaving the hospital, as well as helping with, their billing claims. HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Um, the major focus or yeah, the main focus of HIPAA is protection of clients' privacy. Clients can file a complaint if they think their privacy has been violated. So HIPAA requires that all covered entities have a privacy officer, and so with that is, like when you go to the doctor's office, usually at the beginning of the year, unless, you don't go to the doctor very often, it could be anywhere, but usually at the beginning of the year, you'll have to update your signature on your notice of privacy practices. And if you go through and look through the privacy practices, you will see that there is a privacy officer. And so that privacy officer is there to handle any complaints. Um, should they believe that their privacy has been violated, then we would give them the information to go to the privacy officer, and the privacy officer will, do the investigation to see if any of their, information was or their HIPAA was violated. What information can you give out? So clients have a right to view their medical records. So they can get a copy of their medical records. They can review their records upon request. Each facility will determine the conditions that the request can be reviewed. And so again, we as nurses, we will adhere to the minimum necessary rule to protect the client's privacy. Um, but there are times where you are going to have to give information. So if you have a patient that's being discharged and they need DME, right? They need oxygen, they need a hospital bed, whatever it is that they need at home, right? You can give out the client's name, address, as well as the payer information, right? So, that person, so that company can deliver the equipment to the patient's home. Client's right to consent. And this is, an example of our autonomy or the right to choose. So the client's right to consent or refuse treatment. Um, And then informed consent. And I know that we've all heard about informed consent. So, informed consent must be obtained for invasive procedures ordered either for therapeutic or diagnostic purposes. And so, it means that the client is told the following in a non-medical language, right? So, their diagnosis or what we suspect their diagnosis to be, the purpose and the description of the treatment. Um, and so this could be anything. This could be, sending a client home with a video, or even accessing a website that shows the surgery being performed, before asking them to sign informed consent. So for example, I had cataract surgery a couple of years ago. And so they actually had me watch a video about the procedure and how it was performed, prior to me agreeing to have the procedure. Expected outcomes, expected benefits, possible side effects or complications that can occur from the procedure, the explanation of alternative treatments and their benefits, possible side effects or complications, So let's say, recommending surgery. We're going to go, the doctor's going to give them all the information regarding that, and then they'll also discuss any alternative treatments that may be available and all of those benefits, side effects, and complications. Also, the names and qualifications of the people who will perform the procedure. So, Dr. Smith is going to perform the procedure, and maybe Dr. Jones is going to assist, and maybe there's like another, maybe there's a physician assistant that's going to be in there. They have the right to know everybody that's going to perform the procedure. If they don't know who is performing the procedure, then you don't have them sign informed consent. You go get the provider and have them come and answer those questions. The prognosis if the treatment is not done. So if it's known, because sometimes it's not always known. But if I decide not to have this procedure, what's a potential outcome? Um, and then any answers to questions that the client wants clarified, as well as explaining that the client has the right to revoke written permission at any time. So this, they can decide, they can sign informed consent, and then before going in to have the procedure, they can withdraw and say, never mind, I don't want to have it done. And so the client does have to indicate that they understand the information, right? So making sure that it's the responsibility of healthcare providers to make sure that the clients understand all of this information before signing. Talked about advanced directives, um, and living wills and durable power of attorney. Um, So advanced directives, include the right to participate in and direct their own healthcare decisions, the right to accept or refuse medical or surgical treatment, the right to prepare an advanced directive, as well as information on policies that govern the utilization of those rights. So a living will. A living will is a legal document that describes the type of medical treatments or life-sustaining treatments the person would or would not want if seriously or terminally ill. All right. And so, you can do this while you're young and healthy. You can you can make up a living will. It's, things like if you want blood products, if you want CPR, if you want certain tests or procedures done, medications. Do you want to be an organ an organ donator? Uh, Tube feedings, surgery, hydration, pain medications, all of that. You can list them out. The living will doesn't specify a person to make decisions for them. Again, it's something that you can do while you're young of sound mind, and you can list out what you will, what you do and what you do not want. They living wills are recognized in most states. Okay, there are a few states that don't recognize living wills. So the durable power of attorney, however, is legal document that is valid in all 50 states. Okay. It names a healthcare proxy. So at least someone 18 years of age or older to make medical decisions if that person is no longer able to speak for himself or herself. All right. And so this is usually a little more useful than a living will, right? Because it is legal in all 50 states. Um, it becomes active anytime the person is unconscious or unable to make a medical decision. All right. So again, it needs to be somebody that you trust, somebody that you've discussed your healthcare wishes with. Um, a DNR or a do not resuscitate order is an advanced directive based on the Patient Self-Determination Act as well, that gives the physician gives the physician legal permission to write such an order, right? So you decide that you don't want to be resuscitated in case of something, then the doctor can write that DNR order. For removal of life support, The healthcare provider, the physician must pronounce the client dead and document the status before the nurse turns off a ventilator. And so in many states too, the RN can pronounce the client, but LPNs usually cannot. If the nurse removes life support before the healthcare provider pronounces the client dead, it can be considered an act of murder, and it is both illegal and unethical. So what are some unethical acts? Um, Giving a client a higher than prescribed dose of pain medication, accepting bribes, administering CPR to a client that has a DNR. Then we also talked about leadership styles, um, which is so we talked about the autocratic, the democratic, and the laissez-faire. Um, so autocratic are concerned with the task. Your democratic balance is concerned with the task as well as the employee. Um, excuse me. And then the laissez-faire is more concerned with the with the employee. Then we had a delegation versus assignment. Um, so assignment is distribution of work that each staff member is responsible for a given work period, right? So, these are the normal everyday functions of what, you do when you go to work. Where a delegation is the transfer of responsibility for the performance of an activity from one individual to another, while accountability, right, for the action is retained by the delegator. So if I delegate a task to a UAP, I still am responsible for the task to be completed appropriately and correctly, right? I'm just asking somebody else to perform the task. So before you delegate, you have to assess the client. All right. So the client has to be a stable client. You can't delegate a task to an unstable client. CNAs or UAPs, they cannot delegate. Delegation, once it's accepted, it can't be transferred. So that's where I use the example, right? If I, ask a CNA to, go get vital signs, okay? That CNA cannot delegate that task to another CNA, or transfer that task to another CNA. They can refuse they can refuse the delegated duty. Um, and so for proper delegation, they must voluntarily accept the task that's being delegated. We can ask them why they don't want to do the task. Anytime somebody says no, we want to know why. And then always use the nursing process when delegating. So the rights of delegation, right? The right task, the right circumstance, the right person, the right directions and communication, the right supervision and evaluation. So some of the tasks that we can delegate to a nursing assistant, personal care. So like your hygiene, your dressing, your toileting, grooming, skincare, feeding and hydration, basic restorative skills, so transferring positioning, ambulation, maintaining range of motion, the measuring and recording vital signs, height and weight, intake and output. They can assist with elimination, including catheter care, maintain safety factors, right? So for your fall prevention measures, application of heat and cold, infection prevention measures, as well as collect specimens for urine and stool. Things that we cannot delegate. So sterile technique procedures. Nursing assistants do not have training in sterile technique, crisis situations, right? If they develop chest pain, you can't that's why I said you have to have your client has to be stable, can't delegate unstable client care to a nursing assistant. Although nursing assistants can collect simple data, they have not been trained to make decisions about or interpret the data. Okay, so nursing assistants can evaluate the results of a capillary blood glucose or determine when vital signs need to be rechecked, right? It's just getting the data, right? If you want vital signs, just have them bring the vital signs. They can't um, evaluate those. Duties that are not part of your legal scope of practice may never be delegated, right? So you have to know what your nursing assistants or your UAP scope of practice is and or before you delegate a task to them. Oops. What if delegation is refused, right? So again, nursing assistants have the right to refuse a delegated duty. And so why? We want to know why they feel either unqualified or if they just simply don't want to perform the task. Feeling unqualified is a training issue or a training problem. Not wanting to do an activity is an attitude problem. All right. So feeling like they can't, perform the activity, like I maybe not really good with, I don't know, feel like I can get a good blood pressure, right? Then that could be a training issue. Just refusing because you don't feel like doing something, that's definitely an attitude problem. Change of shift reports. Changes shift report, and it's still better to use your SBAR, but it is a baseline report that you are going to report off to the next nurse. It involves a quick visit of each resident, compare the status with the status, reported at change of shift. Of course, always consider the scope of practice of, the person that you are giving report to. And then how can you increase your employment opportunities? So we talked about these in class, right? Get certifications. So, you know, get your IV certification, you can get long-term care certification, you get wound care certification, go to seminars, leadership courses, in services, books, articles, and of course, networking is always a good way. Depending on where you work, you're going to meet people from other areas. So a lot of times, you can network and get, information, learn about other areas. Because that's one of the great things about nursing, right? There's a variety of things, a variety of areas. You're not always just stuck in one. If you start in one area of nursing, decide that you don't like it, right? You can potentially try to go into another area of nursing. All right. Any questions, Sarah?
No, not at the moment. I'm gonna go back and look at it and catch up on my notes.
All right. Well, if you need anything, just let me know. Um, and I will post this.